Story 1. My students were debating on what hurt the worst when being beaten by their parent. The whole conversation was disturbing, to say the least, but one kid won when he mentioned the cord for the television. He even stood up and proved it by removing his shirt and showing the scars. Looked like Django. It went from students laughing to complete silence and then crying. Story 2. I once had a student show up late every day for class in first period. I asked him after class about his tardiness becoming an issue. He said he is doing the best he can. He has to help raise his younger siblings. He said his dad was an alcoholic and his mom lives in another state. He mentioned that he has to help his 3 younger siblings go to school and drop them off because his father is usually passed out drunk. Story 3. One of my best students in one class showed up late after I had a number of students arriving late, and I had said there would be consequences for the next ones. I walked over to talk to him, and he almost started crying, so we stepped outside. I positioned him away from the class and asked what was happening. Turns out he had been kicked out of the house, living in his car, and his phone had died, which was his alarm. He felt terrible about being late. I told him that I was so proud of him for making it to class. I also said I was going to make angry faces to look like I was mad, so the class didn't think I was going back on my word, but assured him that he was awesome and could take a few minutes to collect himself and join us when he was ready. I think I even waved my arms in the air a bit to exaggerate the act. That student aced my class. He was amazing. Story 4. I had a student not come to school for 2 weeks. When he finally showed, he was limping, and his foot was wrapped up in a large, dirty bandage. I called him to my office after school that day to check in on him. He told me that he had been in the river fishing for his dinner 2 weeks ago and slipped on a rock. He cut his foot so badly that he couldn't walk until today to make it to school. I asked about going to the doctor, but he hadn't seen his parents in so long that he didn't know how to get to them for help getting to the hospital. I called Child Protective Services, got him help as much as they could offer. We found out he was living in a tent because the house had been foreclosed on when his parents disappeared. A bunch of teachers chipped in and got him groceries, clothes, and started driving him places after that. Today, over 2 years later, he's working a job and one of our teachers still clothes and feeds him. The student is too prideful to live with anyone and kind of couch hops now. But he's so strong and resilient. He's an incredible human, and I think he will change the world one day. Story 5. This was a few years ago. A student came into class one day really late, escorted by some official. He threw his bag on the ground and sat in his seat frowning. Turns out, the day before, he went home, and his foster parents had decided they no longer wanted him, so he went into the care of social services. Everything about this child went downhill from there. I was also in an interview with a mother and her son, and she straight up told us that she's not too concerned about her son, as he's not her favorite child. The defeated look on her son's face still tears me up. Story 6. School counselor here. My second year, I had a courageous student who suffered from a rare, debilitating disease. She didn't have many friends because she was never in school and always in hospitals. She loved reading, though. She brought books with her to the hospital. Unfortunately, due to the disease, her eyesight was deteriorating, and she knew she would eventually go blind. She cried in my office, saying she would miss her books and didn't want to be alone in the dark. I couldn't help crying with her. She transitioned to audiobooks on her iPod. This was roughly 14 years ago, a time when middle schoolers didn't have smartphones. A year later, she passed away. My hope is she's at peace, reading all the books she wants, with other friends she's met. Thank you for all the awards and comments. If I can pass on anything to all you educators out there, it's this piece of advice I received from a principal many years ago. Be kind to your students. The 7 hours they have in school may be the best 7 hours of their day. We are never certain what goes on in their homes. Story 7. Got a message today about why a student could not come to class yesterday. Sorry I couldn't come to class. There were gunshots right outside my apartment, and I thought I was going to die. The police did come eventually, and I had to give a statement. I will get the work from yesterday done today. Thanks. Yeah, you get that extension. Story 8. I am hungry. How much time until the break? I will quit school and become a criminal, Because robbing is the only thing I'm good at. I was a teacher at a public school in a poor region in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and many children had problems at home. Many of them didn't have a father and lived in small houses in the slums. The first child didn't have food at home. All teachers knew about it. His mother had a lot of problems, and all his siblings were in the same situation, so every day the most important thing for him was to eat. The teenager apparently had food, but there was a history of violence in his family, and he had already committed crimes. He probably felt empowered by it because he apparently felt bad and inadequate in other activities. I wasn't the regular teacher. I was part of a non-governmental organization that offered specific attention to students who were behind the others. So every day, I would go to their regular class and pick 6 to 10 of them to have special classes. At the beginning, they felt really bad, and other students were calling them stupid. At the end of the program, many students wanted to join us, and our students felt much more confident in general, so it was great. But obviously, we didn't solve the hunger problem, and this teenager wasn't convinced that he had a future out of crime. Story 9. I taught at an inner-city charter school. I had a bright 6th grade girl who started sleeping during my classes, which was not like her. When I asked after school what was happening, she told me that her family, consisting of her 2 younger sisters and their mother who struggled with addiction, moved into the homeless shelter. The last time she slept through the night, all their belongings were stolen. Story 10. A few weeks ago, one of my online students had a band-aid on her left temple, so I asked what happened. She said, "My mom was angry with me and threw a pencil, and it stuck in my head with blood." Story 11. I had a girl playing with something while sitting on the carpet. Rolling it back and forth, she put it in her mouth, took it out and rolled it around again. I told her to give it to me when the other students started their independent work. She gave me a large green pill. At recess, I asked her about it, and she said her mom and dad give her and her siblings one of these every night to help them sleep. I took the pill to the administration and told them what she had told me before searching Google Images to find out what it could be. I found a short list and went back to the administration. I was told it wasn't my job to worry about that. I tried several times that day to get answers, and they said they think it's melatonin, so I should stop overstepping my place. This girl and her siblings are in and out of foster care and come to school with no food and filthy clothes. She came to school in a sweatshirt covered in dried blood 3 days in a row. Her parents wouldn't even sign the papers to get the kids the free school lunches. So I forged the mom's signature every month. Story 12. I don't want to give out too many details, but I've had to fill out 4 Child Protective Services reports in my 4 years of teaching. 3 for students that either confided in me or had signs that they were being physically abused, and 1 that was sexual abuse from the child's father. It's honestly the worst part of the job, having to hear and see just the awfulness some kids have to go through. Story 13. My mom is an English teacher and once told me about a child, a 13-year-old boy, whose mother had committed suicide a few years ago. In a creative writing task a few years after it happened, the question revolved around finding out a secret. The boy then wrote a descriptive piece about finding a body hanging in his front room, lifelessly swinging. Heartbreaking stuff. He had his counselors involved and said he just wrote it from the heart. Poor guy. Story 14. It was my first year teaching, and the holidays were approaching. A 2nd grade student asked me why Santa visits everyone else's home but skips hers. On Christmas Eve, my father and I played Santa. We dropped off gifts at their home for each child with, of course, the permission of the legal guardians. The parents were in jail. Story 15. A student's mother shows up for the first time in almost a year, and she's well-dressed and looking like someone straight out of a fashion magazine. She had the latest phone, flashy jewelry, and was overall expensively dressed. The student, on the other hand, was always shabbily dressed and once went without a blazer for a week because his parents weren't buying him one. We allowed him to wear his sports jersey in class, which is normally not allowed, and constantly called the parents to no avail. She showed the slightest possible interest in her child, telling us to make him study however we wanted and even hinted at hitting him if he didn't behave. After a lot of talking and counseling, it turned out that the student was actually from a well-to-do family, but the parents didn't get along well. The father went out on business trips for weeks, during which he was having multiple affairs, and the mother was doing the same at home. It was an open secret. The child acted weird just to get some attention in school, which he wasn't getting at home. I really felt for the child. He was 11 at the time. Story 16. I taught summer workshops for teenagers for a few years. These workshops were based on electives and were rather expensive for students to attend. In complete honesty, it was really just fancy summer daycare, and I always felt bad for the teenagers because the administration was overly concerned about the education, making the curriculum very boring. They are kids. They want to spend their summers having fun, but wealthy, overbearing parents expect differently. One year, I had this challenging kid. He was 13, rowdy, inappropriate, didn't do any work, constantly throwing things around, etc. The administration tried to remove him, but his grandmother had begged us to keep him on board. Since they were paying a lot of money, the administration agreed under the terms that we just leave him alone. I didn't agree with that at all. No kid should just be ignored, so I didn't. I always tried to encourage the kid's strange jokes and interests and took him for a walk around the school grounds every day. I always gave back as good as I got with the sass, and he enjoyed it. We explored unusual classrooms, kicked around rocks, and joked about whatever YouTube videos he was into. We got to talking, and he started to trust me, telling me about his life. His parents both worked in the airline industry, and as a result, they were very wealthy with homes all over North America, but they were never home. During the school year, he was mostly alone with them, popping in here and there, and in the summers, they would fly him to his grandmother who lives in our small city, and she would care for him for the summers before he would get flown out to wherever his parents were staying for a couple of days to pretend they were a loving family. Then the cycle would repeat. He was so aggressively lonely, didn't believe anyone cared about him, and was constantly acting out. He would skateboard all over the surrounding cities. For a couple of summers, I would run into him in the most unusual places and times. Think outside rundown bars on late Saturday nights, randomly in the huge metro city in the middle of the week, driving by him skateboarding on the side of the highway, etc. He had no one looking after him and no concern for his own well-being and safety. The absolute lack of care or concern for him was heartbreaking, and I tried to do what I could, but ultimately his parents didn't actually break any laws based on his home state rules and regulations, and his parents are, again, very rich. He was well provided for. And how nice was it that they sent him to this expensive summer workshop? I still think about him now and then, even though it's been years. I hope he's okay. Story 17. My mom taught in a very low-income school and every year would go to the dollar store and pick up Christmas presents for all of her students. She knew that many of them did not get any other gifts for the holiday. She also had stories about how they needed to be careful when constructing standardized tests, because there were students who might answer a question like, "What do you do when you're hungry?" with "go to bed" or similar things. Story 18. I had a 10-year-old crying and wishing she was dead. Her older brothers at home were being awful to her, bullying and hitting her. She was saying I should just let her go so she could kill herself, and then she wouldn't be a bother to us or her brothers anymore. Sat her down with the teacher, a cup of tea, some cookies, and talked with her throughout the afternoon. Not much we could do about the brothers, but she left with a smile and came back to school the next day with a smile as well. Now I'm just keeping my eye on her in case things go bad again. But so far, so good. Apparently, talking to us encouraged her to tell her mother about everything that happened, so at least someone at home also kept an eye out for her. Story 19. I work with significant disabilities and autism in an elementary school, and we have one student who, at the end of the day, when we say it's time to go home, almost always says, "Time to go home and go to bed." We get out of school at 2 p.m. As I understand it from a coworker who knows someone who worked with the family since they were toddlers, their mom sends them both to bed immediately, and we're guessing here they lay in bed and watch YouTube on tablets. The younger brother actually has mild leg deformities because he was never allowed out of his crib to walk as a toddler, so his legs are bowed. And before someone asks, no, this is not enough for Child Protective Services to do anything. Bonus time fair warning. Don't read if you have a weak stomach. We have another student who also has a brother in another class in the same situation, who comes to school with pants so tight it's like the old Victorian-era women needing their maids to put a boot in their back to get their corset closed. The first day we comment to the mom, but eventually we're like, Okay, they're broke, and we're just going to leave the button undone, and it's not too bad. Well, one day the brother eats poop, literally reaches into his pull-up, they are 8 and 10, by the way, and grabs some and chomps down while walking at recess. It happened too fast for us to grab him, so we are pretty alarmed and call mom. Response: I told you all to keep his pants buttoned. This woman puts pants on them so small that some of the paraprofessionals physically do not have the strength to button them, instead of taking the time to teach her kids a damn thing. They also don't know how to feed themselves. To be clear, one of them is doing math. They aren't low-functioning enough for these skills to not exist. Neither of them is capable of responding to a verbal question in any way either. Like the one brother can point to an answer or point to what he wants, but neither of them can speak, and neither of them knows how to shake their head, thumbs up or down, anything. The sad truth in this demographic is that their disability is rarely what holds them back. It's the parents. Both sets of brothers I spoke about here would likely be in resource classrooms if their parents were worth a damn. Well, one of them likely not, but the other three for sure. The little boy who stays in bed is in first grade and is the highest academically of all our significant disabilities/autism kids from first to fifth grade.